I remember watching a tech demo a few months back of a startup called Groke. The speed was almost unsettling. AI answers appearing on the screen before the prompt was even finished. People in the industry were whispering that this was the Nvidia killer, and for a moment, it felt like the king of chips finally had a challenger that could make him sweat. After all, Groke was founded by Jonathan Ross, the man who literally built Google's AI hardware. There was this palpable excitement that the underdog was about to disrupt the entire hierarchy. Then the headline hit. Nvidia is handing over $20 billion in cold, hard cash for Groke's assets. It is the largest acquisition in Nvidia's history, dwarfing everything they've done before. But here is where this story takes a truly bizarre turn. Despite this staggering price tag, Jensen Huang released a statement that feels almost paradoxical. He told the world quite clearly, "We are not buying the company." It is a logic that seems to defy the basic rules of business. Nvidia is absorbing the elite engineering talent. They are taking the specialized low-latency intellectual property, and they are bringing the founder himself into the executive suite. Yet, they are leaving the shell of the company to continue operating its own cloud business independently. It's like paying for a penthouse, taking the architecture, the furniture, and the designer, but then claiming you don't actually own the building. This non-acquisition acquisition is a masterclass in strategic absorption. It reveals a fascinating, perhaps even ruthless new playbook for how Nvidia plans to use its $60 billion war chest to ensure that the Nvidia killers of the world don't just lose, they get assimilated.
Welcome to this deep dive. And we are going to unpack precisely that bizarre reality for you. The mission today is to, move beyond those staggering headlines.
Right.
We need to understand this unprecedented $20 billion transaction, which just finalized, not just as a financial thing.
It's way more than that.
It's a technical and I'd even say a philosophical pivot point. It really defines the next big era of AI.
Which is the inference era.
We are moving firmly into the inference era, yes. And what we're seeing here is it's the definitive consolidation of power that you need to dominate it. So we're going to spend a good amount of time looking at the hardware that made Groke so unique, so potent.
And such a threat.
Such a threat, exactly. We'll detail the specific strategic bottlenecks that Nvidia is frankly, desperately trying to bypass with this deal. We'll analyze the market consolidation that comes from it, and then we'll get into the really extreme visions of the future that this whole move is accelerating.
So this wasn't just a simple purchase.
No, not at all. This is a highly calculated move. It's a technological and geopolitical play designed to just eliminate the single most credible threat to Nvidia's dominance.
Okay, let's unpack the deal structure first, because that opening statement from Jensen Huang, "We are not buying the company," that's the core paradox here. I mean, if you pay $20 billion in cash, which, just for context, that's nearly 3 times what they paid for Mellanox back in 2019.
Which was their biggest deal before this.
Their biggest by far, at $7 billion. So you pay that, you walk away with the team, the blueprints. How is that not buying the company?
It's a semantic distinction, really, but it's one that's designed for regulators and rooted in some very precise legal moves. The key is understanding what Nvidia actually bought.
Okay.
They didn't buy the stock of Groke, Inc. What they bought were 2 critical things: a license to the intellectual property, and crucially, the employment contracts of the core technical team.
So not the company, but the brains and the recipe.
Exactly. Specifically, Nvidia paid that $20 billion for a perpetual, non-exclusive license to Groke's core IP. And that IP is all centered around their language processing unit, the LPU, and it's a really highly optimized software stack.
A non-exclusive license is critical terminology here, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It means that Groke, the shell company that's left, can still technically use its own IP.
Yes.
But Nvidia now has the recipe forever. They can bake it into their own products without ever paying another dime.
That's exactly right. It is permanent access to the foundational design. But the real coup, the thing that really justifies that $20 billion price tag is what's being called a reverse acqui-hire.
Reverse acqui-hire.
Or a talent transfer agreement. Simply put, they bought the people. Groke's founder, Jonathan Ross, who is, he's an AI hardware legend. You have to remember, he helped create Google's TPU.
Right.
He's joining Nvidia's executive ranks, and he's not coming alone. He's bringing the leadership, like President Sunny Madra and the core engineering teams with him.
And what are they going to be doing there?
They're being immediately tasked with leading a brand new, very strategic division inside Nvidia that's focused entirely on one thing: real-time inference.
So Nvidia bought the ability to replicate the core of Groke forever. And they bought the genius labor they need to actually do it and integrate it. I mean, that's a masterstroke of corporate strategy. You eliminate your rival's innovative edge, and at the same time, you plug a huge technical gap in your own roadmap.
It's ruthless efficiency combined with a very, very deep war chest. Nvidia is basically paying a massive premium to accelerate its own development timeline by years, and to neutralize the most potent architectural threat it has faced in maybe a decade.
They didn't just want the LPU chip itself.
No, they wanted the philosophy. They wanted the culture of deterministic hardware design that Jonathan Ross's team perfected. That specialized knowledge is worth far more than just the chip designs alone.
But the paradox is still there. If the IP is licensed out and all the top talent is gone, what's left of Groke as a company? And why on earth would you let it continue to exist?
That is the essential piece for the regulatory play. It's the unbought shell. Groke continues to exist and operate as an independent company.
With a new CEO.
Yes, its former CFO, Simon Edwards, is stepping in. And the critical asset that remains is Groke's cloud services business, Groke Cloud. That entity stays operational and, technically independent. That's the crucial distinction for the lawyers.
And this Groke Cloud business, even without its core engineering team, it still has some pretty significant weight, right? I'm thinking of that massive deal with Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. It's a $1.5 billion deal. Groke Cloud is expected to fulfill all of its existing large-scale contracts, including that very substantial commitment to Saudi Arabia's Humane Initiative.
Which is all about building their own sovereign AI.
Exactly. So by allowing Groke Cloud to stay independent and service these non-Nvidia customers, Nvidia can argue that market competition, specifically in the cloud inference sector, hasn't actually been reduced by their deal.
They can say they're just a technology vendor and an employer, not some vertically integrating monopoly.
That's the argument. And that brings us squarely to the motive behind this whole complicated structure, avoiding the regulators. This entire strategy feels like it was engineered from day one just to fly under the radar.
It has to be.
Oh, it is. The primary objective is to sidestep antitrust scrutiny. Specifically, the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act review process, the HSR Act, which governs all the big mergers in the U.S.
And Nvidia has been burned by this before.
They have lived through the nightmare scenario. I mean, the spectacular $40 billion failure to acquire ARM, that deal was killed by regulators all over the world because Nvidia was seen as just consolidating way too much power over essential foundational tech.
And in the current climate, with Nvidia controlling, 70, 80, 90% of the AI compute market, any traditional acquisition of a serious competitor like Groke would have faced years of challenges.
And almost certain failure.
Right. It would have been dead on arrival.
Completely. A full merger would have been a non-starter. So by structuring it as a perpetual license combined with a massive talent transfer, they hope to bypass those traditional merger review criteria.
So they can go to the FTC and say, hey, we didn't acquire a competitor. Groke Cloud is still out there. We just hired some smart people and licensed some tech.
That's the playbook. They're basically using the Microsoft and Inflection AI move from earlier in 2024 as their template.
Oh, right, where Microsoft also just hired the team and licensed the IP.
They're building on that new blueprint. Microsoft showed that this soft acquisition model works, and it's becoming a trend in big tech consolidation. It lets companies with these massive cash reserves just absorb threats without triggering the systemic reviews that were designed to prevent monopolies.
But I have to ask, is this sustainable? I mean, is Nvidia just setting themselves up for a bigger regulatory backlash down the line? Say in 2026 when their new Vera Rubin chip comes out and it has all this LPU tech baked into it.
That is the $20 billion question, isn't it?
Because at that point, the argument that Groke Cloud is an independent competitor offering a unique alternative, it just vanishes.
It does. But for now, the structure gives them immediate regulatory protection. They get the tech now, they integrate the talent now, and they start working on the next-gen chips now. The real regulatory challenge will come in 2026 when that consolidated hardware actually hits the market.
And what happens then?
Well, then regulators will have to decide if this type of deal licensing and hiring qualifies as anti-competitive consolidation under the spirit of the law, even if not the letter. Nvidia is betting that by then the integration will be so complete and their technological lead will be so vast that the whole fight will just seem pointless. Or too disruptive to the ecosystem.
It's an aggressive move.
It's extremely aggressive. They're sacrificing long-term regulatory certainty for immediate technological gain.
Okay, the financial and regulatory gymnastics are fascinating. But they only happened because Groke's technology solved a fundamental physical problem that Nvidia's GPUs have been struggling with. Let's pivot to the engineering. The difference between a traditional parallel architecture and Groke's design. What exactly is the memory wall bottleneck that Groke was targeting?
The memory wall is it's a classic problem in modern computing, but it's especially bad in the world of large language models.
LLMs.
Right. So traditional chips like Nvidia's GPUs or even Google's TPUs, they're designed for massive parallel processing, doing thousands of things all at once. But to do this, they rely very heavily on HBM, or high bandwidth memory.
And that HBM is what holds the giant model weights and all the data.
Exactly. But here's the critical part. The HBM sits physically outside the processing core.
So the processor core is the muscle, but the HBM is like the brain's long-term memory, holding all the data it learned.
That's a perfect analogy. And the physics of getting data from that memory is the bottleneck. Every single time the GPU needs to calculate the next token in a sequence, predict the next word in your sentence, it has to fetch the model weights from that external HBM across physical wires.
And even though HBM is super fast, that physical movement still creates a delay.
A huge delay. And that delay forces the processor to just sit idle, waiting for the data to arrive. That is the memory wall effect.
And what does that physical movement actually cost? In terms of power and time, there's some pretty striking numbers.
The costs are staggering, especially when you scale it up. Moving data from external HBM costs about 6 picojoules per bit.
6 picojoules.
Now, a picojoule is a tiny unit of energy, but when you're talking about LLMs that have to move trillions of bits of data every single second, those picojoules add up to massive, massive power consumption.
And that power consumption turns directly into heat.
Exactly. That high energy cost of just moving data back and forth is the precise reason why advanced GPUs like the H100 and the H200 need these really sophisticated, really expensive liquid cooling systems. The chips are just generating so much waste heat that traditional air cooling can't keep up. So it's a performance limiter because of latency, and it's an infrastructural nightmare because of the cooling.
Okay, that makes the problem very clear. So now let's detail Groke's LPU architecture. How does their language processing unit solve this specific physics problem?
Groke took a radical approach. It's all about specialization. The LPU is an ASIC, an application-specific integrated circuit. It was built with one hyper-specific purpose: sequential text generation, or inference.
So it's not trying to be a general-purpose processor like a GPU?
Not at all. And its big architectural difference is memory placement. Instead of that external HBM, the LPU uses SRAM static random access memory that is built directly into the silicon of the chip itself.
So the memory and the processor are integrated on the same die. There's no need to cross that physical gap anymore.
Precisely. By embedding the SRAM right there next to the processing units, they completely eliminate that external memory reliance. And that is why the LPU is capable of just astonishing speed.
How much faster are we talking?
The on-chip SRAM is up to 100 times faster than external HBM.
100 times, just by getting rid of that physical gap. And what about the energy cost?
It's dramatically lower. Retrieving data from Groke's local SRAM only costs about 0.3 picojoules per bit.
So 6 picojoules for HBM versus 0.3 for SRAM.
It's a 20-fold reduction in energy just for data access. And that translates to about a 10 times energy efficiency advantage per token, specifically for inference, over a high-end GPU. This is what allows Groke chips to be air-cooled, which, as we'll get into, is a massive strategic advantage for deploying them. This wasn't a software trick. This was a fundamental re-engineering of the physics of computation.
That distinction between 6 and 0.3 picojoules, that is the entire rationale for the $20 billion.
That's it right there.
But speed alone isn't enough. The architecture is also defined by its software and hardware co-design, this idea of the power of determinism.
This is the genius layer on top. GPUs operate probabilistically. They're flexible, they adapt to dynamic data flow. Groke's LPU, on the other hand, uses a deterministic architecture. Don't think of it as a flexible road network. Think of it more like a perfectly choreographed assembly line or a train schedule.
Meaning every single step is pre-planned and accounted for.
Exactly. Groke's founder, Jonathan Ross, famously said that they designed the compiler first, and then they designed the chip to perfectly execute what the compiler told it to do. So the compiler pre-decides the exact path of every piece of data, every calculation, down to the billionth of a second. There's no waiting, no dynamic resource allocation. The path is set.
So while a GPU might be juggling a bunch of jobs at once, the LPU is running one job sequential inference with perfect synchronized efficiency with zero bottlenecks.
That is the critical difference. This deterministic zero idle time approach is what enables that ultra-low latency, and that's measured by time to first token.
The speed at which the AI starts responding after you hit enter.
Right, and Groke's LPU can deliver 300 to 500 tokens per second for real-time applications. Now, if you compare that, running a standard model like Llama 3 70B, a high-end GPU is typically struggling to hit 50 tokens per second for a single user.
So a 6 to 10 times difference in instantaneous response speed. That's transformative.
And it's not just a parlor trick. This is the foundation for the next generation of AI applications.
Like what?
Well, if you're building agentic AI applications where one AI agent quickly calls another agent, which calls a tool, any latency in that chain just kills the whole thing. In high-frequency trading, microseconds mean profit or loss. For realistic digital humans or virtual assistants, that instantaneous, smooth output is what maintains the illusion of reality. It makes the interaction feel natural instead of, frustratingly slow.
Low latency is the prerequisite for fluency.
It is.
Okay, we've covered the overwhelming technical advantages. Now we have to address the trade-offs, the LPU's weaknesses. If this technology is so much better for inference speed, why was Groke vulnerable to an acquisition instead of just running away with the entire market?
The LPU's weakness stems directly from its specialized strength. It's that reliance on on-chip SRAM. While SRAM is lightning fast, it has tiny memory capacity. Each LPU chip only has about 230 megabytes of SRAM built into the silicon.
230 megabytes. That is astonishingly small. I mean, a high-end Nvidia H200 GPU has, 141 gigabytes of HBM3E memory? Modern AI models are just massive.
They are. The Llama 3 70B model needs tens of gigabytes of memory just to load the weights. You can't fit that onto a single LPU chip.
So what do you do?
You have to link hundreds of LPU chips together, spanning multiple server racks, just to distribute and hold the model weights across the entire cluster.
So to get one lightning-fast inference for a 70 billion parameter model, you need this huge, sprawling array of specialized chips, all working in perfect deterministic harmony.
Exactly. So the physical footprint of an LPU data center installation is far larger than a GPU cluster that can fit the same model onto just a handful of high-density chips in a small box. And that leads to a much higher initial hardware investment and more complexity in deployment. That was their primary vulnerability. They were excellent at speed, but terrible at density and upfront cost.
There's a second weakness, right? Related to the determinism itself. It makes it rigid.
The deterministic nature, while it enables perfect speed for current models, also makes the LPU brittle. It is extremely optimized for the current dominant architecture, which is the transformer model.
So what if that changes?
Well, if the AI research community suddenly shifts to a new model architecture, the LPU's compiler and its fixed hardware path would really struggle to adapt.
Yeah.
GPUs, because they are general-purpose parallel processors, are far more adaptable to dynamic workloads or fundamental changes in AI model design.
So Groke traded flexibility for speed.
They did. And that inflexibility made them a risky bet for long-term investors, a risk that Nvidia was very happy to absorb and integrate.
So Nvidia paid $20 billion to acquire the solution to a specific critical technical problem. But the rationale is even broader than just speed. It's about solving three massive internal and external infrastructure bottlenecks that were really choking their ability to grow. Let's start with the market context. The shift to inference.
This is the main economic force behind this whole acquisition. The AI market is fundamentally changing. For years, the gold rush was in training large models, these massive upfront compute costs where GPUs are king and the margins are huge.
But training is a finite thing.
It is. It's a high-cost activity, but it's not continuous. Inference, on the other hand, running those trained models for billions of users, is a continuous, high-volume, and very cost-sensitive activity.
And that transition to inference is where the real scale is and where the real economic risk for Nvidia lies.
Absolutely. The inference market is projected to just skyrocket. It's expected to be over $250 billion by 2030. Economically, inference is expected to be a high-volume but low-margin business.
Which is the exact opposite of the huge margins Nvidia makes selling training chips.
Exactly. And the LPU, with its 10 times energy efficiency advantage, gives Nvidia the specialized, highly efficient hardware they need to compete profitably in that low-margin, high-volume future. Without it, they really risked losing the inference market entirely to rivals who are focused purely on efficiency.
Okay, now let's tackle the technical bottlenecks they're bypassing. Starting with memory. Tell me more about bypassing the HBM bottleneck.
HBM, high bandwidth memory, is the lifeblood of Nvidia's top-tier GPUs, like the H100 and Blackwell. But HBM manufacturing is really complex. It relies on advanced stacking techniques, and it's controlled by an oligopoly of suppliers. You've got SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron, and that's pretty much it.
And the supply chain just has not been able to keep up with NVIDIA's exponential demand.
Not at all. I remember reading reports that HBM capacity for 2026 was effectively sold out, and 2027 capacity was rapidly being claimed.
And that puts a hard limit on how many top-tier GPUs NVIDIA can physically produce.
It creates a capacity ceiling. It literally restrains their revenue growth. If you can't get the HBM, you can't ship the high-end GPU. But here is the critical leverage point that Groke provides.
LPUs don't use HBM.
They don't use HBM. By integrating LPU technology, NVIDIA instantly gets a completely viable, non-HBM constrained option for all those high-volume, ultra-low latency inference workloads.
So they gain an entirely new stream of revenue and growth that is totally independent of HBM supply. This lets them allocate their scarce HBM resources only to the highest margin training chips.
It's pure supply chain diversification. It secures their continued dominance by ensuring they are not 100% reliant on a single congested supply line for their core product.
Okay, moving on. We mentioned the heat problem.
Right.
Let's dive deep into bypassing the cooling and contrast bottlenecks. Let's talk cooling first. How does Groke solve this infrastructure headache for NVIDIA?
The energy cost disparity we talked about, that 6 picojoules for HBM versus 0.3 for SRAM, is directly responsible for the cooling challenge. NVIDIA's latest and greatest chips, like Blackwell and the upcoming Vera Rubin platform, are so power-dense that they require liquid cooling infrastructure.
And globally, most existing data centers, the ones owned by everyone from enterprise clients to mid-tier cloud providers, they're only equipped for traditional air cooling. And upgrading to liquid cooling is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar project.
Exactly. So this creates this massive market that NVIDIA's cutting-edge products just can't penetrate immediately. And this is where Groke's technical flaw, its high physical footprint, actually becomes a strategic asset.
How so?
Groke's LPUs are air-cooled because of their superior efficiency, and they require hundreds of chips spread across multiple racks.
Wait, so the LPU's weakness, its large physical footprint, allows NVIDIA to turn abandoned or underutilized space into revenue?
Yes. NVIDIA can now sell LPU-enhanced technology into this vast ecosystem of air-cooled data centers that hyperscalers might be abandoning or struggling to repurpose. They can leverage existing floor space and cooling infrastructure that would otherwise just sit idle. It lets them capture short-term revenue and expand their market reach far beyond the elite liquid-cooled data centers that are reserved for their flagship chips.
It's a genius tactical move to use up that global infrastructure capacity.
It is a true end-to-end strategic play.
Okay, so that's cooling. Now for the manufacturing bottleneck, CoWoS. What is CoWoS? Why is it scarce? And how does Groke bypass it?
CoWoS stands for chip-on-wafer-on-substrate. It's TSMC's advanced packaging technique that's essential for stacking HBM modules right next to the logic die.
And you need that for maximum GPU performance.
You do. But the process is complex, it's time-consuming, and it relies on extremely limited, highly specialized capacity at TSMC. It is currently one of the tightest choke points in the entire semiconductor industry.
So if your chip needs CoWoS packaging, your production scale is capped by TSMC's ability to stack and package chips, not just their ability to make them.
Precisely. Now, remember the LPU's architecture. Because it uses that highly efficient on-chip SRAM instead of external HBM stacks, Groke chips can perform really well on older manufacturing nodes.
Oh, interesting.
Groke was fabricating on the 14-nanometer node at Global Foundries, for example. These older nodes are far less constrained, and they don't require the cutting-edge CoWoS packaging at all.
So NVIDIA buys the IP, gets access to this design, and now they can produce high-performance inference chips using non-constrained, older, cheaper manufacturing lines, completely bypassing the CoWoS logjam.
It's all about redundancy and resilience. NVIDIA just bought a manufacturing hedge against two major infrastructure risks at the same time: the scarcity of HBM suppliers and the scarcity of advanced packaging capacity at TSMC.
Finally, let's just summarize the competitive logic here. This deal is really about neutralizing the threat and future-proofing.
The neutralization part is obvious. They've absorbed the most credible architectural threat to the GPU's memory wall dominance. And, maybe more importantly, they prevented any major rival Meta, Microsoft, even a foreign government from acquiring Groke and establishing a dedicated, high-performance, non-GPU, non-HBM constrained path for AI compute. That alone is worth billions.
And the future-proofing part.
The end goal is integration. That $20 billion is a down payment on a future unified architecture. Nvidia plans to integrate the LPU's high-speed, deterministic sequential inference logic into their upcoming Vera-Rubin architecture.
Which is expected in 2026.
Right. And the result will be a unified superchip that marries the massive parallel processing power of the GPU for training and high-throughput inference, with the LPU's specialized sequential speed for real-time inference. They're solving their weakness by consuming their strongest competitor's strength.
This absorption deal is a game changer. It reshapes the competitive landscape for years. Let's start with the immediate winner, Nvidia, and how this just drastically deepens their moat.
The moat was already formidable. It was built on sheer compute power and scale. But now it's, I'd say, virtually impregnable because they control every single layer of the AI infrastructure stack.
They already had, what, 70 to 95% of the compute market?
Yes, and they own the high-speed interconnects, NVLink, and InfiniBand. They produce specialized GPUs for data handling. They have the CPUs with Grace.
But the real lock-in has always been the software. It's CUDA. It's the reason developers won't leave the ecosystem, even if a cheaper chip comes along.
Correct. CUDA is the cornerstone. And by absorbing the LPU IP, NVIDIA extends CUDA's dominion directly into that high-volume inference domain. So a developer who trains their model using NVIDIA tools in CUDA can now seamlessly deploy it on LPU-enhanced hardware that's integrated right into the NVIDIA platform.
So there's no learning curve, no re-optimization, no incentive to look anywhere else.
Exactly. It further entrenches the software lock-in, and it transforms the NVIDIA ecosystem into a fully vertically integrated one-stop shop for the entire AI lifecycle.
Okay, now for the flip side. The clear losers in the competitor challenge. How does this impact AMD and Intel?
For AMD, this is a substantial setback. AMD has been actively positioning its Instinct accelerators as the open, cost-effective alternative for inference. They've been leaning heavily on open standards to challenge CUDA.
And now?
Well, with NVIDIA now controlling the world's most credible, low-latency inference IP and being poised to integrate it into their flagship chips, AMD faces a significantly steeper challenge to achieve performance parity, particularly in that crucial real-time, low-latency market. They're now competing against a unified stack that has just solved its biggest structural weakness.
And what about Intel with their Gaudi accelerators?
Intel is already burdened by its own internal manufacturing and strategic restructuring challenges. This just isolates them even further from the cutting edge of specialized AI hardware. While they can compete on general purpose scale, that deterministic speed offered by the LPU architecture is a capability they now have to either develop on their own or license from someone else.
A process that will take years and a lot of money.
Exactly, leaving them even further behind as the market consolidates around speed and efficiency.
What about the niche players, the specialized AI chip startups like Cerebras and Sambanova? They've also developed unique non-GPU architectures.
For them, this deal is an existential threat to their business model. It creates what you could call a clouded exit path.
Meaning?
Well, for a startup, the primary exit is usually an acquisition by a major tech titan. The $20 billion price tag that Groke just set is an unprecedented benchmark. It essentially says that only Nvidia, Microsoft, or maybe Meta can afford to acquire foundational next-generation AI innovation.
So the high price tag restricts the pool of potential buyers to just the absolute largest players.
Precisely. And this stifles competition because it limits the venture capital funding available to smaller startups. Investors might get hesitant to fund these highly innovative but specialized hardware companies if the only viable exit path involves a price tag that only 3 companies in the world can afford. It effectively consolidates innovation within big tech's walls.
This deal also has massive geopolitical implications, especially for the burgeoning sovereign AI movement.
Oh, this is a major supply chain shock for any nation that's aiming for technological self-reliance. Nations seeking AI sovereignty like Saudi Arabia with its Humane Initiative, or various entities in Europe and Asia, they all recognize that relying solely on NVIDIA's GPUs meant dependency on a single U.S. supplier.
And Groke, with its innovative inference architecture, was their most credible, high-performance alternative for building their own domestic compute infrastructure.
They were actively calculating their future supply chains around Grok's independence to avoid that very dependency choke point.
And now that's gone.
Exactly. Groke's absorption forces these sovereign AI programs to immediately and fundamentally recalculate their strategies. Their options have narrowed dramatically.
So what can they do?
They can pivot to alternative hyperscaler custom silicon, like Google TPUs or Amazon Trainium, which just introduces new dependency issues. They could look toward the uncertain landscape of Chinese alternatives. Or they can simply accept that Nvidia is the default single global supplier for high-end AI compute.
So it dramatically reinforces the global reliance on one U.S. corporation for a foundational AI infrastructure.
It does.
Finally, let's revisit the regulatory gambit and the unique dynamic of the remaining Groke cloud. What is the expected role of this independent co-opetition?
Groke Cloud's continued independence is the regulatory firewall. While Nvidia now controls the IP and the future roadmap, Groke Cloud is still operational under new management. This means Groke Cloud can continue to offer LPU access to third parties,
Including competitors of Nvidia's hyperscaler partners.
Yes, and it can service those sovereign AI contracts. So it maintains a theoretical competitive presence in the market, even though its core technology is now owned by its biggest competitor.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
It is. Groke Cloud basically functions as a specialized, high-speed inference lane, potentially competing with the very cloud providers who buy Nvidia chips. Nvidia hopes this arm's-length co-opetition will satisfy antitrust regulators, allowing the service to exist as a sort of controlled competitor. It offers the LPU experience without the full regulatory headache of a traditional merger.
But the reality is that Groke Cloud's future is entirely dependent on Nvidia, isn't it?
100%. Its future competitiveness will be entirely dependent on Nvidia's willingness to allow its licensee to access future iterations and upgrades of the core IP.
The $20 billion absorption of Groke is more than just a commercial deal. It's viewed by some as the definitive hardware move that accelerates humanity toward a very specific vision of the future. Let's start with the perspective that's rooted in the accelerationist movement, the HEC vision, eliminating the pause.
What's fascinating here is how a technical capability can fuel a philosophical zealotry. For accelerationists, or EJ proponents, every millisecond of delay, that latency gap we were talking about, is seen as an unacceptable barrier to achieving true machine intelligence, or the technological singularity.
They prioritize raw speed above everything else. They see the hardware limitation, specifically the memory wall of GPUs, as the only thing holding back HEI.
Exactly. So they see this $20 billion move as providing the final hardware piece for their vision, the ability to process information at the speed of thought. If AGI is constrained by data transfer speeds, it can't be a true peer to human intelligence. The low-latency deterministic architecture, the LPU, integrated into the Nvidia ecosystem, is seen as the foundation for real-time AGI, a machine capable of instantaneous reasoning and generation.
This shifts the conversation from just building a powerful tool to birthing a peer that's capable of operating without any cognitive delay.
That's the core implication. And the concern that's raised by this perspective, which we have to consider, is profound. We are accelerating toward a world where the essential human cognitive process of reflection, that deliberate pause before you act, is being engineered out of machine existence.
This deterministic hardware prioritizes raw, unbridled output and speed over everything else.
It fundamentally changes the pacing of future human-machine interaction.
And that focus on raw output leads us directly to the stagnation versus supremacy debate.
There's a contingent in the tech world that views this deal as a decisive strike against caution itself.
I've seen this viewpoint expressed a lot, particularly by hardware architects. For years, they've argued that progress has been held hostage by what they call the Great Stagnation, and they blame cautious regulators and insufficient hardware.
So they view the Nvidia acquisition as a tactical move against safetyism. Exactly. The idea that prioritizing regulatory safety and precaution has actively held back vital technological progress. So by creating a deterministic compute powerhouse like the LPU-enhanced Vera Rubin, Nvidia is seen as building a bypass around regulatory hurdles and prioritizing technological supremacy in a global race.
That's the interpretation. The deterministic architecture is seen as an engine that just delivers predictable, fast, unconstrained output. And in doing so, it moves past the slow constraints that are often associated with cautious development and regulatory compliance.
It reflects a deep commitment to compute supremacy. The belief is that if the U.S. technological engine slows down, maybe because of regulatory safety concerns, a less cautious rival on the global stage will gain a decisive and unrecoverable lead.
So this viewpoint frames the $20 billion deal not as market consolidation, but as a high-stakes gamble. Trading caution for acceleration, breaking the stagnation, and prioritizing raw technological output over precautionary principle.
It's a clear reflection of the belief that the long-term risk of stagnation and losing the AI race outweighs the short-term risks of regulatory circumvention or rapid, uncontrolled development. They are essentially celebrating the removal of the hardware constraint that, enforced caution.
Now let's turn to the third philosophical interpretation, one that paradoxically links this consolidation to the dream of democracy and openness, the utopian paradox, sovereign bow scarcity.
This vision, which is often championed by developers focused on decentralized systems, sees Groke's independence as the essential element for achieving a decentralized sovereign technology stack. The idea is that the sheer speed and efficiency of the LPU, once integrated and scaled globally by Nvidia, will drive the cost of high-speed inference down to near zero.
So if the underlying compute becomes hyper-efficient and widely available, the scarcity of intelligence, which currently makes AGI costly and exclusive, just vanishes.
Precisely. They imagine a future where high-speed inference is ubiquitous and beyond the control of any single government or entity, like technological oxygen. In this vision, the merger provides the necessary hardware foundation for the transhumanist transition.
Augmenting human biological limitations with a lightning-fast ghost in the cloud that is always on and always cheap.
And this speeds us toward a post-scarcity civilization fueled by intelligence.
But the irony is impossible to ignore. They're seeking decentralization and technological sovereignty through a massive acquisition by the world's largest chip company, which is fundamentally consolidating power.
The irony is rich, but the logic holds for them. They view Nvidia's consolidation as a necessary evil to achieve the scale and efficiency required to democratize access later. Their hope rests entirely on Groke Cloud's continued independence to provide an open access point to this specialized, hyper-efficient hardware, preventing Nvidia from immediately locking down every bit of LPU capacity.
The ultimate goal is augmentation of human capability, but the path requires reliance on the monolithic giant.
It does.
It seems regardless of which philosophical camp you belong to, the accelerationists, the pragmatists focused on supremacy, or the decentralists dreaming of post-scarcity, they all agree on one thing. This $20 billion deal is the definitive hardware transaction that secures the immediate future of AI development.
It confirms that speed is the limiting factor for true machine intelligence, and the company that buys the speed buys the future roadmap.
That is the perfect distillation of this massive shift. This deep dive has shown us that Nvidia is moving definitively from a high-margin GPU manufacturer to a comprehensive AI compute company focused on dominating the entire AI lifecycle, from training all the way to ultra-low latency inference. The deal is truly a strategic endpoint. It secures the critical talent, the revolutionary low-latency technology, and most importantly, a crucial bypass around three massive industry bottlenecks.
The message sent to every competitor and global market participant is unambiguous. The inference war is the new battlefield, and speed and efficiency are the non-negotiable metrics that will determine the winners of the next decade. Nvidia has positioned itself flawlessly to capitalize on that colossal, $254 billion projected inference market by 2030. They've reinforced their CAD moat, and they future-proofed their supply chain against every major physical constraint. The ultimate success of this move will hinge on two factors: whether the FTC ultimately sanctions this new soft acquisition blueprint as a viable regulatory strategy, and whether Nvidia can successfully integrate the fast-moving, deterministic LPU culture into its monolithic corporate structure by the time the unified Vera Rubin platform launches in 2026. Nvidia's assimilation of Groke is not merely about buying a chip design. It is about buying time, removing immediate competition, and installing the final piece of specialized hardware required to accelerate the world toward a future defined entirely by instantaneous machine intelligence.